Hello everyone. Welcome back to the YouTube channel or the blog, wherever you're watching this. This is Jesse here to talk more on our series of Selenium. This video in particular will be talking about test cases and the arrangement of the test case in comparison to the actual test written in code. So essentially what that means is we're going to talk about how our test cases are organized, kind of what they look like, what they're supposed to look like, and then how that gets translated over to a test case here in Selenium with C# and Visual Studios. So a test case, right, has to be very thorough, broken down into a large number / series of steps, right? So step 1 is making sure that you know exactly what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, what you're supposed to do, and what you're supposed to check. This includes, but is not limited to, any click, any operation, any typing, any submitting, anything like that. It has to be recorded as part of the test case, as long as it's a variable that could affect whether the application is working or not. So what we're going to talk about now is how that relates to what we're doing here in Visual Studio with C# and Selenium. So our test cases, right? I think the way I like to look at the test case is kind of like a book, right? So it should start essentially with kind of a table of contents, what the test case is going to go over, like check this page, do this part, make sure this button is working, make sure this is working, make sure this is working. So I actually have a list here. So for a church marshal, say I want to test the login, right? Or test the login screen, the table of contents for the test would work something like this, right? So the very first thing you have to do is open the browser, right? After that, you would go to the URL, step 2. Step 3 would be verify that you are on the login screen, right? Because verification is always a part of testing. Part 4, type username. It's pretty straightforward. Type the username in the username text box. Type 5, type the password. And now, it's very essential that the username and password are separate in situations where you want to test specifically the username or want to test specifically the password for different things. Step 6, click submit. Step 7, verify login succeeded. Step 8, log out. Step 9, close browser. So it seems pretty straightforward. And in a manual situation, you would follow that exactly. Although it'd be a little bit more in detail than that, where it says go to URL. A documented version of the test case would usually have the URL. Verify login screen would usually put some kind of method, like maybe take a screenshot or something of indicating that you've done it. Type username, then again, with the test case, with the specifics of the test case, the username would usually be there. Type password, the password would usually be there. Click submit. Click submit will just be click submit, or submit the form, or submit the login into the login screen. Verify login succeeded would be something along the lines of taking another screenshot, and then logging out would be clicking on log out, or maneuvering to log out depending on the application, right? So this is specific. This is not specific to Church Marshall. Every application is going to have, every application that has like some kind of sign-in feature or something like that will have sign in or log in or log out, right? Whereas some applications don't actually have a sign in when you open them. They will have a sign in on some other section. May have sign in features on some other sections of the application. So it's very important to note. It's just an important fact to note. So we've talked about the details of construction of a test case, or what a test case looks and sounds like, for all purposes. So now we're going to go into details about what that looks like here in the code. Now, the test case that we have here in the IDE that you guys can see, it's the login to Marshall test. So essentially, it's the test case related to the steps that I just had in this list that we just talked about. Now, while this test case is constructed a little bit differently than the way it would be over there, I mean, it's similar, but since some of the methods have been written in the helper methods file, right? It's kind of it's not gonna look exactly the way it looks on in the list format. So let's look at the test actually. So right here we have all the using statements. Essentially, a using statement is a statement that allows Visual Studio to use syntax that belongs to the class or reference where that statement comes from. A class is basically a group of variables, yeah, it's just a group of variables. It can include functions, it cannot. It could just be a bunch of x equals 8 and just variables. But the classes also can include and create like its own unique syntax and mechanisms, which is why you can see using OpenQA Selenium. That's actually allowing us to use Selenium in the code. Microsoft Visual Studio's test tools, unit testing, allows us to use some of the organizational aspects of a unit test. Sorry, camera shifted. Some of the organizational aspects of a unit test for the construction of the test. Using system has to be everywhere. It's just using the system, like allowing it to build, allowing it to do, compile, allowing it to run, things like that. Using UI automation helper allows me to call methods and functions from the automation helper. Then using Selenium automation allows me to call, say, there's tests that are similar in function, that have some similar steps, but it's not repetitive enough to warrant the function being in the UI automation helper. I can also call other functions from other tests to kind of help out. The namespace would be the name of the project that we're working in, right? So, as you guys can see over here, the name of the project is Selenium Automation. So the namespace over here is Selenium Automation. Hold on, let me see if I can get rid of this. Okay, there it goes. In a lot of cases, it's important to always make sure that the namespace is aligned with the namespace over here, because if it's not, when you're trying to build, there could be some failures and problems that come into play. The test class is one of those unit test bindings I was talking about with the Microsoft Visual Test Tools.unit test. It allows the test to be recognized it allows the code to be recognized as a test by Visual Studios, which allows the Test Explorer to, allows you to run tests from the Test Explorer. Public class, I mean, if there's something you don't know or understand about code, public class is not really going to make sense to you, but I can kind of try to explain it in like 10 seconds real quick. So public essentially means that anything that's written as part of this group of code can be used in any other function of code by calling or referencing to it. Class just means, again, like I said, a group of values, functions, or etc. It's just a group of, I don't want to say a group of code because that sounds kind of vague and ambiguous, but essentially it is like a group of code with similar functions or things that are connected, organized and grouped together. It's a class. So login Marshall right here is the name of the file. All right, the name of the C# file. UI automation test base allows the test. So basically, when I want to run this test, it's going to start with everything in this UI automation test base file first, and then come back and try and run the test from here. Right. This is because the UI automation test base file, which is similar to the helper methods file, but a little bit different. Remember, the helper methods file is something that you can construct, or I constructed myself to help with the testing. The automation base file needs to be there regardless. It has to be there. The automation test base file contains the starting of the test, opening the browser and closing the browser, and tear down and clean up and things like that. Now, technically, it doesn't have to be there, but you need to have these functions need to exist somewhere within the test, and having them repeated here would be kind of silly. So there's a different file that has that. So this is basically going to run the UI automation test base file first. It just connects the two, and then it will go ahead and run the login Marshall, the test that exists in a login Marshall file. So it's true that actually one single file could contain multiple tests, right? So on the left side here, it actually doesn't take the entire file and just turn it into a test. It takes any group that says test method underneath it. So say I created another bracket that had test method here, then I had a group of code, or like a class or whatever, or test in there. It would create another test here on the left side in the test explorer. So that's just what the test method just signifies that this is a test. This is a test, or this is a unit test. It's not a unit test, but it tells Visual Studio that it's a unit test, which allows it to run it, things like that. Public void login to Marshall. So public, again, is the same as public over here. It just means that anything in here can be used in other places, right? We're about to see an example of that really quickly, actually. But void is something more code related. It is not essential to the test. It could be. It doesn't have to be void. It could be static, maybe. But void essentially means that this method will not return any values. Now, if you don't understand what that means, it may be something you want to look up. I can explain it really quickly, but it basically means that usually sometimes you want kind of like a calculator, you want the method to return a number or some kind of result to you, and this will not return any result. That's basically what it's saying. Login to Marshall in this case would be the name of the test, right? Login to Marshall, and then the brackets are just syntax things that kind of have to be there. This is the table of contents that I designed. This is the way I design tests specifically. So the first part has a table of contents, and then the rest of the test will follow afterwards. Well, in this case, the table of contents is just the first part, login to Marshall, right? It's just that's all this test does. All it does login to Marshall is this, the table of contents. After the table of contents, you would then begin to proceed with the test. So the table of contents essentially is like how many chapters are going to be in this book. The book only has one chapter. Chapter 1, login to Marshall. So now we get into chapter 1. This is chapter 1, login to Marshall. Private void. So private means that any functions that are designed or created here cannot be called in other methods. I do this because you don't want, in some cases you don't want this. I can explain it in a later video, but it's not really important to note for the specific purpose of why we're doing this. Void, like I said earlier, doesn't return a value or anything like that. And then login to Marshall is that one method, that the first part of the table of contents. We're gonna see a better example of the whole table of contents system in a later video, but just so they understand, this login to Marshall relates to this entire block of code as a part of the test, as a step in the test. The stuff inside is not something we need to worry about right now. I'll talk about it in another video, but I just want you guys to understand how the tests are organized and constructed. We can look at another test real quick just to get a better feel of it. Okay, yeah, here's a better example. So this is our table of contents here. The name of the test is Verify Global Sanctuary. It has 3 chapters. The first chapter is Login to Marshall. The second chapter is Verify Test Object. And the third chapter is Log Out of Marshall, right? So the first chapter is here. The second chapter is here. And the third chapter is here. So I just want us to understand kind of the organizational structure of how these tests are put together and written. I think that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll talk more about how the actual specifics behind writing the tests. Maybe get into some HTML tag things. I may do that video first, or whichever, just depending on the situation. But have a great day, everyone. Make sure you come back, subscribe if you really feel like you benefited from these videos. Really enjoy doing this. This is Jesse. See you guys next time.